if you believe yourself to be in a tradition-rich organization, and depending on your perspective, it could be viewed as a tradition-bound organization, then usually the language of the box is prevalent. This reference, this metaphor to a box. And the implication in the language of the box is that truly creative thinkers live outside this box. To me, that's a misunderstanding of how these things actually work. The box itself is just another way of saying, it's a euphemism for rules, regulations, standard procedures that represent best practices. After all, that's what laws are predicated upon. Best practices to control society, for example, to make sure that society functions smoothly. Now, within an organization, typically standard operating procedures are built to reflect the best practices, to gain maximum efficiency and effectiveness from organizations. So in that sense, if you accept those definitions of the box and the very reason behind rules, procedures, and standards, then it's clear that you can't begin outside of that context, that you have to recognize the purpose behind procedures and standards, the so-called box, and understand them very thoroughly. So it's really the responsibility of the organization to begin the process of teaching the box, oddly enough. Now, that's not to imply that one has to stay within the box, but knowing the box first is the starting point. Only understanding those best practices can you determine the second step in this, which is the creation of an environment that encourages creative problem solving, right? But that has to be done in the context of, in reference to, again, those standardized best practices. Now, creating an environment for this type of creative problem solving, there's a lot of risk involved in that process, because stepping outside, again, to use this metaphor, again, this cliche, when you step outside of that, you run the danger, I suppose, of both failing in the mission. You could run the danger of upsetting the organization itself, the human dynamic in organization, and other factors that you don't intend. So those are typically referred to as second and third order consequences or effects of what you do. The third part of this outside the box thinking is the part in many ways that's the most difficult. And that in many ways is to impart judgment to individuals involved in this process. The judgment required to determining when it's appropriate to use critical thinking skills, that is, decision making, problem solving in the presence of standards, procedures, and rules, and when to use truly creative decision making, which is perhaps problem solving in the absence of standard rules, procedures, even principles on which to operate. So those two things are complementary. They don't happen in a vacuum. One doesn't just show up in an organization thinking outside the box without having a thorough understanding of the background. Now, the best organizations out there, whether it be the private sector or the public sector, anywhere, the best organizations value, in fact, protect individuals within the organization that are comfortable negotiating their way between these environments. Right? I typically refer to these individuals as smart heretics. So they're spouting heresies. They're saying things that run in the face of the status quo. Now, it comes at great personal risk to the individuals who are doing that, who are spouting heresies, who are claiming heresies. Oftentimes, in tradition-rich organizations, there's a great deal of centrifugal force that tries to keep everybody operating within the same standards and principles. Smart heretics see better ways of doing business. But again, there's a great deal of risk to them personally in this. I think smart leaders in organizations fence off those smart heretics. They protect them and in some ways encourage that way of thinking, because that kind of asymmetric way of thinking that again, to use this cliche, outside the box thinking can actually encourage innovation in the organization. But again, it comes at a great cost. It can come at a cost to the manager or leader in this situation as well, because you're doing things that go beyond established best practices. So all the conversation about the box is grossly oversimplified out there today, and I believe that we could do a much better job of approaching this cliche of outside the box by coming up with a very deliberate form of approaching creative problem solving by, again, number one, thinking about the box, being very consistent about how we teach the box first, very thorough about how we teach the box first. Following that, creating an environment that encourages creative decision making with respect to the box. And then the third and final piece, once again, is to impart judgment in some way, both for leaders and for individuals involved in the organization, is to determine when it's appropriate to operate, to think within the box, and when it's appropriate to step outside that box and create your own criteria, your own standards, your own procedures on how to move forward. Well, smart heretics are anyone who questions reigning orthodoxies. So if the orthodoxy of the organization is to be very authoritarian, to be set in every single procedure involved in the process that that organization is involved with, then the smart heretic may take the form of somebody who is completely in their own world, does things completely differently, may be that type that kind of throws things against the wall, spitballs ideas to see what sticks, to upset people in the organization by questioning deeply and firmly held assumptions they have about their role, about that organization's place in the market, as an example. But on the other side, in a more entrepreneurial, free-flowing workplace, a smart heretic may actually represent just the opposite. In that case, heresy becomes not this free-thinking, throw all the rules out the window approach. In this case, heresy might be to apply discipline to the process and to put business practices in place that demand a very structured, deliberate approach to problem solving.